When the mail-order bride stepped down from that dusty Wyoming coach, the rancher waiting for her saw two things that would change everything: the purple bruise shadowing her cheekbone, and the note clutched in hands that trembled like autumn leaves. Inside that folded paper wasn't a letter of introduction, it was a declaration of worthlessness, words so cruel they burned to read. Right then, Caleb Turner made a decision that would shake the foundations of everything she'd been taught to believe about herself. But first, she'd have to survive the night without running. Will Lena find the strength to stay? Watch until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of Wyoming dust, so thick it turned the afternoon sun into something dim and resentful. Caleb Turner stood 30 feet back from the stage stop, hat pulled low, shoulders squared against a wind that carried the smell of sage and distance. He'd been standing there for the better part of an hour, watching the horizon like it might offer him an escape route he hadn't considered. It wouldn't. He'd made his choice 3 months ago when he'd answered that advertisement in the territorial newspaper, his handwriting cramped and uncertain on paper that cost him 2 days' wages. Rancher seeking companionship, honest work, honest intentions, no promises beyond shelter and respect. The words had felt like lies even as he'd written them, but loneliness had a way of making a man bargain with truth. Now the moment had arrived, and Caleb found himself wishing he'd added more words to that letter, or fewer, or maybe none at all. The coach door swung open with a metallic shriek that scattered a pair of ravens from the nearby telegraph post. The driver, a weathered man named Hoskins who'd been running this route for 15 years, climbed down and started hauling luggage from the boot without ceremony. "She's the last one," Hoskins called out, not bothering to look at Caleb. "Other passengers got off at Laramie." Caleb didn't respond. His attention had fixed on the dark rectangle of the coach doorway, waiting for movement, for the shape of a future he'd purchased through the mail like a piece of equipment or a head of cattle. The shame of that burned in his chest, but not enough to make him walk away. A hand appeared first, gripping the doorframe. Small hand, pale fingers, knuckles white with pressure. Then a boot, practical, worn at the heel, dusty from travel. Then the rest of her emerged into the failing light, and Caleb felt something in his chest constrict. She was young, maybe 25, maybe younger, with dark hair pulled back in a bun that had come partially undone during the journey. Her dress was gray, simple, mended at the sleeves. She was full-figured in a way that made the dress pull slightly across her hips and shoulders, and she moved with the careful, apologetic posture of someone who'd learned to make herself smaller than she was. But it was her face that stopped Caleb's breath. The bruise spread from her left cheekbone to her temple, a sunset of purple and yellow that spoke of violence at least a week old, maybe more. Her eye on that side was still slightly swollen, the skin beneath it carrying a darkness that wasn't entirely from impact. She'd tried to hide it with powder that had worn away during the journey, leaving patches of coverage that only made the damage more obvious. Lena Whitaker, that was the name she'd signed in her letters, stepped fully onto Wyoming soil and immediately wrapped both arms around the carpet bag she carried, holding it against her body like armor. Her eyes, dark and careful, swept across the empty landscape, the ramshackle stage stop, the water trough with its coating of green algae, before finally landing on Caleb. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Caleb saw her flinch, a movement so small it was almost invisible, just a tightening around her eyes and a fractional shift backward. She was preparing to be judged, he realized, preparing for disappointment or disgust or whatever reaction men had given her before. He took off his hat. "Miss Whitaker, he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "I'm Caleb Turner." "Mr. Turner." Her voice was quiet but clear, with an East Coast accent that made the words precise. "Thank you for meeting the stage." An awkward silence opened between them like a chasm. Hoskins finished with the luggage, a single trunk that he dropped with a thud that made Lena jump, and climbed back onto the driver's seat. "You folks work out your business," Hoskins said, gathering the reins. "Next coach through is Thursday week." The stage pulled away, wheels creaking, horses snorting, leaving Caleb and Lena standing in the settling dust like two people who'd been dropped onto a stage without learning their lines. Caleb bent to pick up her trunk, grateful for something to do with his hands. It was lighter than he'd expected, as if she'd left most of her life behind. When he straightened, Lena was still standing in the exact same position, bag clutched to her chest, eyes down. "Wagon's just over there," Caleb said, nodding toward the buckboard he'd left tied to a hitching post. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. We should get moving before dark." "Of course." Lena moved forward, each step measured and quiet. When she reached the wagon, she paused, clearly uncertain how to climb up in her skirts while maintaining any dignity. Caleb set the trunk in the wagon bed, then turned back. "I can help if you... I can manage." The words came quick, almost sharp, and she immediately looked like she regretted them. "Thank you, but I can manage." She did manage, though it cost her something in pride, her face flushing as she struggled onto the seat. Caleb pretended not to notice, busying himself with securing the trunk. When he finally climbed up beside her, he made sure to leave a full foot of space between them. The horse, a steady mare named Bess, started forward at a click of Caleb's tongue, and they rolled out onto the road that led north through empty grassland toward the mountains that sat purple and distant on the horizon. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of the woman beside him. She sat rigid, that carpetbag still clutched in her lap, her breathing shallow and controlled. He could feel her tension like heat radiating off sun-baked stone, and it made his own shoulders tight with the weight of not knowing what to say or do. The letters they'd exchanged had been brief, formal, revealing almost nothing. She'd written that she was educated, able to read and write and do figures. She'd referenced teaching experience, though she hadn't provided details. She'd said she was seeking a fresh start in the territories, away from family and prior circumstances. She hadn't mentioned the bruise or whatever circumstances had put it there. Caleb hadn't mentioned the loneliness that sometimes felt like it would hollow him out completely, or the way the ranch house echoed with absence, or the fact that he'd gone 3 years without a conversation that lasted more than 5 minutes. They'd been two desperate people negotiating a transaction through the mail, and now they were stuck with the reality of it. "The ranch isn't much," Caleb said finally, because the silence was becoming unbearable. "But it's solid. House is small, but the roof doesn't leak. There's a barn, a chicken coop, pasture land for the cattle." "That sounds adequate." Lena's voice was so quiet he almost missed it over the wagon wheels. "I don't expect..." Caleb stopped, choosing words carefully. "I wrote in my letters that I'm an honest man. I meant that. This arrangement, I won't force anything. You'll have time to settle, to decide if you want to stay." Lena turned her head slightly, not looking at him directly but acknowledging the words. "The arrangement was made by mail, Mr. Turner. The terms were clear." "Terms can change if they need to." She didn't respond to that, but her grip on the carpetbag loosened fractionally. They rode on through the cooling afternoon, the land opening up around them in waves of grass and scattered juniper. A hawk circled high overhead, riding thermals. In the distance, a small herd of pronghorn antelope broke and ran, white rumps flashing. "It's very empty," Lena said after another long silence. "Yes, ma'am. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles south. Town is 12 miles east, but it's barely a town. General store, blacksmith, saloon, not much else." "I see." Something in her voice suggested this information wasn't unwelcome. Caleb glanced at her from the corner of his eye, trying to read her expression. The bruise seemed darker now in the slanting light, and there was a tightness around her mouth that spoke of pain held in check. He wanted to ask about it, wanted to know who'd done that to her and why, but the question felt like an invasion. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope that had arrived 3 days ago. "This came for you," he said, holding it out. "Postmarked from Pennsylvania. I didn't open it." Lena's reaction was immediate and visceral. She recoiled from the envelope like it was a snake, her face going pale beneath the bruise. "I don't want it. Miss Whitaker, I don't want it." Her voice cracked, and she turned her face away, staring hard at the empty landscape. "Please, Mr. Turner, I don't want it." Caleb looked down at the envelope in his hand. The return address listed a town called Harrisburg, and the handwriting was aggressive, heavily pressed into the paper. No name, just an address. "All right," he said quietly, and tucked it back into his pocket. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view. It appeared gradually, emerging from the landscape like something that had grown there naturally. A low house built of logs and rough-cut planks, a barn with weathered red paint, a split-rail fence enclosing a yard where chickens scratched in the dirt. Modest, functional, isolated. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney. Caleb had banked the fire that morning, and it was still burning. Lena sat up straighter, her eyes moving across the scene with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. "It's clean," she said, and there was something in her voice that suggested this mattered more than size or luxury. "I try to keep it decent." Caleb guided the wagon through the gate, which stood open, and pulled up beside the house. "Like I said, it's not much. It's more than I expected." The admission hung in the air between them as Caleb set the brake and climbed down. He moved to help Lena from the wagon, but she was already descending on her own, still clutching that carpet bag. Her feet touched the ground, and she stood there for a moment, looking at the house like she was memorizing it or saying goodbye to something. Caleb lifted her trunk from the wagon bed and carried it toward the front door. "I'll show you inside, get you settled. You must be tired from the journey." "Mr. Turner." Lena's voice stopped him at the threshold. He turned back to find her standing exactly where she'd landed, arms wrapped around herself now instead of the bag. "Before we go in, I need to ask you something." "All right." "In your letters, you said you were an honest man. You said you wanted companionship and that you'd offer respect." She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time with full directness. "Did you mean that, or were those just words to bring a woman west?" The question hit harder than any fist. Caleb set down the trunk and walked back to where she stood, stopping a careful distance away. "I meant every word," he said. "I'm not a complicated man, Miss Whitaker. I work the land, I keep my promises, and I don't raise my hand to things weaker than me. That includes women, animals, and anything else that depends on my care." He paused, then added, "I don't know what you left behind, but whatever it was, it doesn't follow you onto this land. Not while I'm alive." Lena's eyes searched his face, looking for lies or cracks. Whatever she saw, there must have been enough, because some of the rigidity left her posture. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb picked up the trunk again and led her inside. The interior of the ranch house was as modest as the exterior promised. A main room that served as kitchen and living area, a stone fireplace with a cast-iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, windows with simple curtains. A ladder led up to a small loft area. A single door stood closed on the far wall. "That's the bedroom," Caleb said, nodding toward the door. "It's yours. I've already moved my things out." Lena turned to him, confusion clear on her face. "Your things?" "I'll sleep in the barn. It's comfortable enough, and there's a stove out there for cold nights." "But this is your home, Mr. Turner." "I can't." "The bedroom is yours," Caleb said again, more firmly. "I won't debate it. You'll have privacy, a door that locks from the inside, and space to be your own person. That's what I'm offering. The arrangement was for marriage. The arrangement can wait until you're ready to arrange it." Caleb set her trunk down beside the bedroom door. "You'll eat at my table, you'll live under my roof, and in time, if you decide you want more than that, we'll talk. But I won't force your hand on anything, Miss Whitaker. You've had enough forcing in your life, from the look of things." His eyes flicked to the bruise just for a second before he caught himself. Lena's hand rose unconsciously to her cheek, fingers hovering over the discolored skin without quite touching it. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "My brother did this." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Caleb felt rage kindle in his chest, hot and immediate, but he kept it off his face. "Where is he now?" "Pennsylvania, where I left him." She lowered her hand, wrapping both arms around herself again. "He didn't want me to come west. He said I was needed at home, that I was being selfish and ungrateful. When I insisted, he expressed his displeasure." "He hit you." "He did more than that." Lena's voice went flat, emotionless. "But yes, he hit me. 2 days before I left. The people I was staying with, distant relations. They gave me that letter you have. They said I should carry it as a reminder of what happens to women who overreach their station." Caleb's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What's in the letter?" "I don't know. I've never read it. I don't need to. I know what it will say." She met his eyes again, and this time there was something fierce burning behind her exhaustion. "They wanted to make sure I understood that I was being discarded, Mr. Turner. Not sent away with hope or blessings, but thrown out like something broken and useless. They wanted me to arrive here already ashamed. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of cruelty Caleb could barely comprehend. He'd known hardship, known loss, known the casual violence of the frontier. But this deliberate, calculated destruction of a person's spirit was something else entirely. "Give me the letter," Lena said suddenly. Caleb pulled the envelope from his pocket and held it out. Lena took it with steady hands, walked to the fireplace, and threw it directly into the flames. They both watched as the paper caught, curled, blackened, and disappeared into ash. "I won't carry their shame anymore," Lena said, still watching the fire. "I came west to be someone different, to be someone who isn't broken." "You're not broken," Caleb said. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw disbelief warring with desperate hope. "How can you know that? You just met me." "I can see it in the way you're still standing. Most people would have crumpled under what you've carried. You're still here, still breathing, still trying. That's not broken, Miss Whitaker. That's steel." For the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, Lena Whitaker smiled. It was small, uncertain, flickering like candlelight, but it was real. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. I'll let you get settled. There's water in the pump outside, fresh eggs in the basket by the door. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Door's always open. The barn door, I mean. Your door, you keep that locked if you want." He was halfway to the exit when Lena spoke again. "Mr. Turner? May I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you answer that advertisement? A man like you, with land and a home, you could have found a wife through more conventional means." Caleb stopped, his back to her, considering the question. He could lie, could offer some sanitized version of the truth, but she'd given him honesty, raw and bleeding. She deserved the same. 3 years ago, I lost my parents to fever," he said quietly, "within 6 months of each other. This was their land, their dream. I kept it running because I didn't know what else to do. But every day it got quieter and emptier, and I got more like a ghost haunting my own life. I'd go weeks without talking to another soul. Started to forget what my own voice sounded like." He turned to face her. "I answered that advertisement because I was drowning in silence, Miss Whitaker. And I thought maybe, if I could offer someone else a safe harbor, I might find one myself." Lena nodded slowly, understanding written in her expression. "We're both refugees, then." "I suppose we are." She looked around the small house, at the simple furniture and clean floors and the fire burning in the hearth. When she spoke again, her voice carried something that might have been the beginning of peace. "This will do, Mr. Turner. This will do just fine." Set. That first night, Caleb lay awake in the barn loft, listening to the distant sounds of the house settling. A lamp had burned in the bedroom window until well after midnight, and he'd wondered what Lena was doing in there, unpacking, reading, crying, planning her escape. All of those seemed equally possible. The barn was cold despite the small stove he'd lit, and his bedroll was thin. He'd given Lena all the good blankets, and now he was paying for that generosity. But somehow the discomfort felt right, like a penance he owed for bringing her into this uncertain situation. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the restless movements of the horses and his own circling thoughts. When dawn came, gray and cold, Caleb rose stiff and aching. He went through his morning routine on automatic, fed the horses, checked the cattle in the near pasture, collected eggs from the coop. The chickens clucked and fussed around his feet, familiar and demanding. He was crossing the yard with the egg basket when he noticed smoke rising from the house chimney. Fresh smoke, recently started. The door stood ajar, and through the gap he could see movement inside. Caleb approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. He stopped at the threshold and knocked on the door frame. "Miss Whitaker? It's Caleb. May I come in?" "Please do." Her voice came from near the stove. He entered to find Lena standing at the kitchen workspace, still wearing her gray dress from yesterday, her hair pulled back severely. She'd set the table with plates and cups he hadn't used in months, and the smell of coffee filled the room. "I found your supplies," she said, not quite looking at him. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I should make myself useful." "You don't have to." I know I don't have to. I want to. She poured coffee into both cups with hands that trembled slightly. You've given me shelter and kindness, Mr. Turner. The least I can do is contribute to the household. Caleb set the egg basket on the counter and moved to the table, settling into the chair that had been his father's. The coffee was strong and hot, better than anything he'd made for himself in years. They sat in silence for a few moments, both uncertain how to bridge the gap between strangers and something more. How did you sleep? Caleb asked finally. Better than I have in months. Lena wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The bed is comfortable. The room it's very generous. And the door lock? It works properly? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Yes, I checked it several times. Good. More silence, but this one felt slightly less strained. Mr. Turner, Lena said, setting down her cup. I've been thinking about our situation, about the arrangement. Caleb's stomach tightened. If you want to leave, I'll take you back to the stage stop. Won't argue about it. That's not what I was going to say. She looked at him directly, and he saw determination in her dark eyes. I don't want to leave, but I also don't want to be a burden or a charity case. I need to have purpose here, something beyond just existing in your house. What did you have in mind? In my letters, I mentioned teaching experience. That was an exaggeration. Before my parents died, I taught at a girls' academy in Philadelphia. Reading, writing, basic mathematics, geography. I was good at it. Pride crept into her voice. The students respected me, and I helped several of them advance beyond what anyone expected. Caleb leaned forward, interested. Why'd you stop? My parents' death left me with nothing but debts. I had to leave the position and move in with my brother. He didn't approve of women working outside the home. He wanted me to keep house for him, to make myself small and grateful and invisible. Her hands tightened on the cup. I tried to find teaching positions secretly, but he discovered the letters. That's when things became difficult. He's the one who gave you that bruise. Among other things, Lena's voice went flat again. But that's the past now. What matters is the future. And I'm thinking that even out here, there must be children who need education. Ranch families, homesteaders, people too scattered to build a proper school. Caleb considered this, running through a mental map of the surrounding area. There's the Morrison family, 8 miles south. They've got 4 kids, youngest about 6. The Harrises to the east have 3. Old man Chen has 2 grandsons living with him. That's near on a dozen children within a reasonable distance, I'd say. Would their parents pay for tutoring? They might. Most of them are struggling to teach the children themselves, and they're not educated people. They'd see the value in it. He paused, an idea forming. There's an old line shack on the back 40. Hasn't been used in years. It's small, but it's solid. Could be converted into a schoolhouse without too much work. Lena's eyes lit up, the first genuine spark of enthusiasm Caleb had seen from her. Really? You'd allow that? It's not about allowing, Miss Whitaker. If you want to teach, you should teach. Gives you independence, gives you purpose, and gives those kids something they desperately need. Seems like everybody wins. I wouldn't expect you to do the work of converting the building. I'll handle the repairs, Caleb said firmly. You focus on planning your curriculum, figuring out what materials you'll need. I can ride around to the families, let them know there's a teacher available if they're interested. For a long moment, Lena just stared at him, and Caleb felt the weight of her scrutiny like physical pressure. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. Doing what? Helping me, supporting this idea. You don't know me, don't owe me anything beyond the basic terms of our arrangement, yet you're offering to rebuild a building, to advocate for me with your neighbors, to give me freedom and purpose, when you could just as easily demand I focus on cooking and cleaning and other wifely duties. Caleb met her eyes steadily. Miss Whitaker, I brought you out here because I was lonely, and I thought maybe having another person around would fill the quiet. But I'm not so desperate that I need to cage another human being to ease my own pain. If you're going to be here, you should be here as yourself, not as some diminished version you think I want. And if teaching is who you are, then you should teach. Lena's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. She blinked them back, lifting her chin. You're not what I expected, Mr. Turner. Neither are you, Miss Whitaker. She almost smiled at that. I suppose that makes us even. The conversation shifted then, moving to practical matters. What supplies would be needed for the schoolhouse? How to reach out to families? What schedule might work best for children who had farm chores? They talked through breakfast, through the morning, into the afternoon, and Caleb felt something shift in the house. The emptiness was still there. The silence still waited in the corners. But now there was possibility woven through it, the promise that maybe, just maybe, this strange arrangement might become something neither of them had dared to hope for. Something like home. Over the following days, a rhythm began to establish itself at the Turner Ranch, though it was nothing like the conventional patterns Lena had known in her previous life. Each morning she woke before dawn to the sound of Caleb moving through the yard, his boots crunching on gravel as he went about the endless tasks that kept a ranch functioning. She would lie still in the darkness of her room, listening to those footsteps, learning to distinguish his gait from the wind or the horses or her own anxious imaginings. The door lock remained engaged every night. She tested it compulsively before sleeping, her fingers working the mechanism over and over until she was certain it would hold. Old habits died hard, and the need to barricade herself against intrusion had been beaten into her bones by months of living under her brother's roof. But each morning when she emerged from the bedroom, fully dressed with her hair pinned severely back, she found the main room empty and undisturbed. Caleb never entered the house before she appeared, never tested the bedroom door, never made demands or asked questions about why she needed such absolute privacy. Instead, she would find evidence of his consideration scattered through the space like gifts he was too proud to present directly. The rocking chair that had sat broken in the corner was suddenly repaired, its joints tight and smooth. The stack of firewood beside the stove was always replenished before she woke. Fresh water stood ready in the pitcher, though she never heard him fill it. These small acts of care unsettled her more than any demands would have. She had learned to navigate a world of explicit expectations and violent consequences. This quiet kindness was a language she'd forgotten how to speak. On the fourth morning, Lena woke to find Caleb standing in the yard with 2 horses saddled and ready. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, coffee cup in hand. "Morning, Miss Whitaker. I thought today we might ride out to the line shack, if you're willing, let you see what we're working with." Lena hesitated, her free hand moving unconsciously to grip the doorframe. The thought of being alone with him, miles from the house, in an isolated building, sent familiar panic skittering through her chest. But she forced herself to breathe through it, to recognize that this man had done nothing to warrant her fear. "I'm not much of a rider," she admitted. "The bay mare is gentle as a house cat. I'll keep the pace easy." He paused, reading something in her expression. "We can take the wagon if you'd prefer. More comfortable, anyway." The offer of choice, simple as it was, loosened something in her chest. The wagon would be better. "Thank you." 20 minutes later, they were rolling across open grassland, the morning sun warm on Lena's face. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape scroll past with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. The emptiness still struck her as both beautiful and terrifying. All this space with nowhere to hide, yet somehow room enough to breathe. "You grew up in a city," Caleb said. It wasn't quite a question. "Philadelphia, streets and buildings and people everywhere you looked. I could walk for hours and never see the horizon." "Miss it?" Lena considered this carefully. "I miss parts of it. The symphony on Sunday afternoons, the libraries, the way you could disappear into a crowd when you needed to be invisible." She twisted her hands together. "But I don't miss the person I was there, the person they tried to make me. Who did they want you to be?" Quiet, grateful, smaller. She looked down at her body, at the way her dress pulled across her hips and bust despite the modest cut. "I was never small enough for them. Not in body, not in voice, not in ambition. My brother especially. He wanted me to take up less space in every possible way." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the road. "Your brother sounds like a coward. He would say he was trying to protect me from myself, from the disappointment of wanting things I could never have." "What did you want?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Lena realized that no one had asked her that in years. Not her brother, not her distant relations, Not even herself in the dark hours when she'd tried to imagine a future beyond survival. I wanted to matter, she said quietly. I wanted my thoughts and words to count for something beyond keeping house and minding manners. I wanted to teach children to think for themselves, to question, to grow beyond what their circumstances told them was possible. She laughed, a bitter sound. Dangerous ambitions for a woman who should have been content with making a good match and managing a household. Nothing dangerous about wanting to use your mind. My brother thought differently. He said I was being corrupted by modern ideas, that I was making myself unmarriageable with all my talk of education and independence. Lena's voice hardened. He was probably right about that last part. What man of quality would want a wife with opinions? Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. A man who's so fragile he can't handle a woman with thoughts of her own isn't a man of quality, Miss Whitaker. He's just a bully with better clothes. The fierce certainty in his voice caught Lena off guard. She met his eyes and found no mockery there, no condescension, just honest conviction. You really believe that? She said wonderingly. I do. My mother ran this ranch alongside my father for 20 years. She could rope a steer, birth a calf, and balance the books better than any man I've known. My father valued her for her strength, not despite it. That's what partnership looks like, or it's supposed to. Your parents sound remarkable. They were. Grief flickered across Caleb's face, quick and deep as a knife wound. They would have liked you, I think. My mother especially. She had no patience for people who tried to diminish others. The wagon started moving again, and they rode in comfortable silence until the line shack appeared in the distance. It was smaller than Lena had imagined, a rough structure of weathered wood with a sagging roof and gaps where the chinking had fallen away. But it sat on a small rise with a good view of the surrounding land, and there was a creek running nearby that would provide water. Caleb helped Lena down from the wagon, his hands careful and brief on her waist, before he immediately stepped back. They approached the shack together, and he pushed open the door with a groan of protesting hinges. Inside, the space was dim and dusty, filled with the detritus of abandonment, a broken chair, old newspapers, a rusted pot. But the walls were solid, the floor mostly intact, and when Lena looked up, she could see where sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, creating columns of golden light. It needs work, Caleb said, stating the obvious. But Lena was already moving through the space, her mind transforming the decrepit reality into something else entirely. The roof can be patched, the walls reinforced. We'd need a proper stove for winter, and windows. Real windows with glass so the children can have light to read by. She turned in a slow circle, her arms spread. Desks could line this wall, a blackboard there, shelves for books here. You see it already. I do. Lena's voice carried an excitement she hadn't felt in so long it almost frightened her. It could work, Mr. Turner. It really could work. Then we'll make it work. Caleb pulled a small notebook from his pocket and began making notes. I'll start on the roof tomorrow. Need to ride into town for supplies, glass, nails, proper lumber. Might take a few trips to get everything. I could help with the work. You'll have enough to do planning lessons and reaching out to families. Besides, he added with the ghost of a smile, carpentry is one of the few things I'm actually good at. They spent another hour at the line shack, Caleb taking measurements while Lena planned the layout. When they finally returned to the ranch house, the sun was high overhead and Lena's mind was spinning with possibilities. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table long after dark, writing lists and sketching crude diagrams by lamplight. She didn't hear Caleb approach the house until he knocked softly on the doorframe. Brought you something, he said, holding up a battered wooden box. Lena rose and crossed to the door, curious. Caleb set the box on the table and stepped back, giving her space to investigate. Inside, she found books, a dozen of them, worn and well-loved, covering subjects from basic arithmetic to geography to classic literature. These were my mother's, Caleb explained. She used them to teach me and my sister before my sister, he cleared his throat. Before she passed. Thought they might be useful for your school. Lena lifted one of the books reverently, running her fingers over the embossed cover. Inside the front cover, a woman's handwriting proclaimed, Property of Margaret Turner. Knowledge is freedom. I can't take these, Lena whispered. They're too precious. They're meant to be used, not collecting dust in the barn. My mother would want them going to good purpose. Caleb shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the emotion in the moment. There's slates and chalk in there too, and some old primers that might help the younger ones. Lena looked up at him, this man who kept surprising her with his quiet generosity. Why are you doing all this, really? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. My sister was like you, smart, ambitious, full of ideas that didn't fit the shape people wanted to put her in. She wanted to be a doctor. Can you imagine? A girl from a Wyoming ranch wanting to study medicine. He smiled sadly. My parents supported her, saved money for years to send her east to school, but she got sick before she could go. Fever took her in 3 days. I'm sorry. She was 15 years old with her whole life planned out, and then she was just gone. Caleb's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I can't give her the future she deserved, but maybe I can help you have yours. Seems like a fair trade. The naked honesty of the statement left Lena momentarily speechless. She clutched the book tighter, feeling the weight of his grief and hope pressing against her own. I'll honor her memory, she said finally. I promise you that. I know you will. After Caleb left for the barn, Lena sat with the book spread across the table, planning her curriculum with a focus she hadn't felt in years. The work absorbed her completely, driving away the shadows that usually crept in once darkness fell. She didn't realize how late it had gotten until she heard footsteps in the yard and tensed automatically, her hand reaching for the lamp to extinguish it. But the footsteps didn't approach the house. Instead, she heard the barn door open and close, heard the low murmur of Caleb's voice as he spoke to the horses. The nightly ritual of his presence at a distance had become oddly comforting. He was there if she needed him, but never imposed himself on her space. It was a careful balance that spoke of respect she'd rarely experienced. The days began to blur together in a pattern of quiet industry. Caleb rose before dawn to work the ranch, then spent his afternoons on the line shack, patching roof and reinforcing walls and installing the windows he'd hauled from town. Lena cooked meals that they ate in careful silence, developed her lesson plans, and slowly began to transform the main room of the ranch house into something that felt less like a way station and more like a home. She moved through her tasks with a hyper-awareness of Caleb's presence and absence. When he was near, she felt both safe and terrified, grateful for his protection, but waiting for the moment when he would demand payment for his kindness. When he was away at the line shack or checking the herd, she felt both relieved and strangely bereft, the silence of the house pressing in around her. A week passed, then 2. The line shack transformed under Caleb's hands, becoming something solid and promising. He built desks from salvaged lumber, rough but functional. He installed a proper stove and tested the chimney until it drew cleanly. He even constructed a small porch where the children could wait during inclement weather. Lena watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and growing anxiety. Each improvement brought her closer to the moment when she would have to step into the role of teacher again, when she would have to trust that this fragile new life wouldn't be ripped away like everything else had been. You're quiet today, Caleb observed one afternoon as they rode back from the line shack. More than usual, I mean. Lena startled from her thoughts. I was just thinking about the school, about whether anyone will actually send their children. I've talked to the Morrisons and the Harrises. Both families are interested. Old man Chen said his grandsons need education more than they need to know how to rope cattle, which is high praise from him. And they're comfortable with me teaching them? Why wouldn't they be? Lena gestured vaguely at herself. I'm not exactly the image of a proper school teacher. I'm too young, too what? Too everything. She looked away, her voice dropping. My brother used to say I was too large to be a teacher, that children would mock me, that no one would take me seriously. He said I should focus on losing weight and making myself presentable before I tried to instruct anyone. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, and when he spoke, his voice was low and hard. Your brother was wrong about a lot of things, Miss Whitaker, but that might be the most poisonous lie of all. You're educated, patient, and passionate about learning. That's what makes a good teacher. The rest is just noise from small-minded people who can't stand to see someone rise above their circumstances. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Other people make it complicated because they're threatened by competence. He glanced at her. Those families don't care what size dress you wear. They care whether you can teach their children to read and write and think. Everything else is irrelevant. Lena wanted desperately to believe him, but years of conditioning were hard to overcome. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then you'll learn and improve, same as anyone. But I don't think you'll fail. Caleb's certainty was both comforting and terrifying. I've watched you work through those lesson plans. You're thorough, creative, and you genuinely care about the material. That's more than most teachers bring to the job. They rode in silence for a while, Lena turning his words over in her mind like unfamiliar coins, trying to determine their value. "Mr. Turner," she said finally, "may I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "You've been sleeping in the barn for weeks now. Don't you resent it? Don't you resent me for taking your room, your comfort, your life, and turning it all upside down?" Caleb considered the question seriously. "I won't lie and say the barn is as comfortable as the house. My back reminds me of that every morning. But resentment?" He shook his head. "No. I chose this arrangement, Miss Whitaker. I chose to bring you here, and I chose to give you space and safety while you figure out if you want to stay. Those were my decisions, and I stand by them. Even though we're not," Lena struggled to find the right words. "The arrangement we made was for marriage. But I can't be a wife to you, not yet, maybe not ever. Doesn't that bother you?" "I didn't bring you here to force you into intimacy," Caleb said quietly. "I brought you here because I was lonely, and I thought maybe we could help each other. If all we ever are is two people sharing a roof and making a home, that's still more than I had before. And if someday you decide you want something different, we'll talk about it then. But I won't pressure you, Miss Whitaker. Not about that, not about anything." Lena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "I don't understand you." "What's to understand? I'm just a man trying to do right by someone who deserves better than what life has given her so far." "Most men wouldn't see it that way." "Then most men are fools." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, and Lena found herself smiling despite the emotion clogging her throat. "You're very certain about things." "I'm certain about right and wrong. Everything else is just details." When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped Lena down from the wagon with the same careful brevity he always showed, his hands gentle but impersonal. She watched him lead the horses to the barn, his movements economical and sure, and felt something shift inside her chest. Fear was still there, would probably always be there to some degree, but woven through it now was something else, a tentative, fragile thread of trust. That evening, for the first time since arriving, Lena left her bedroom door ajar when she went to sleep. The next morning, she found a fresh bouquet of wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. No note, no explanation, just purple asters and golden prairie coneflowers arranged with more care than skill. Lena touched the petals gently, then looked out the window toward the barn. She couldn't see Caleb, but she knew he was there, maintaining his respectful distance while somehow managing to close the gap between them, one small gesture at a time. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Lena began taking coffee to the line shack in the afternoons, arriving with 2 cups and whatever simple food she'd prepared for lunch. At first they ate in near silence, both uncertain how to navigate this growing intimacy. But gradually conversation began to flow. Caleb told her about the ranch, about the challenges of maintaining it alone, about his dreams of expanding the herd, and maybe bringing in some sheep. Lena talked about her childhood in Philadelphia, the parents she'd loved and lost, the joy she'd found in teaching before her brother had crushed it out of her. "He wasn't always cruel," she admitted one afternoon as they sat on the line shack porch, watching clouds build over the mountains. "When we were young, he was protective, almost kind. But after our parents died and he inherited everything, something changed. He became obsessed with propriety, with what people thought, with controlling every aspect of our lives." "That's when the violence started?" Lena nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "It began with words. Constant criticism about my appearance, my weight, my ambitions. Then came the restrictions. No visitors, no correspondence, no leaving the house without his permission. And when I tried to resist," she touched her cheek where the bruise had finally faded to nothing. "He made sure I understood the consequences of disobedience." "How long did you live under his roof?" 2 years. 2 years of shrinking and apologizing and trying to make myself invisible. I thought I would die there, Mr. Turner, not from violence, but from the slow starvation of having no purpose, no agency, no hope. Caleb's jaw worked with suppressed anger. How did you find the strength to leave? I'm not sure I did find strength. I think I just reached a point where death by his hand seemed preferable to death by degrees. So I took the money I'd hidden from my teaching wages, answered that advertisement, and ran. She looked at him. I don't know if that makes me brave or just desperate. Sometimes there's not much difference between the two. Caleb set down his cup. What matters is you got out. You're here now and he can't touch you. Can't he? Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. I still hear his voice in my head, Mr. Turner. Every time I look in a mirror, every time I plan a lesson, every time I dare to hope that this might work, I hear him telling me I'm not good enough, not worthy, not capable. How do I escape that? One day at a time, one small victory after another until his voice gets quieter and your own voice gets louder. Caleb leaned forward, his expression intense. You're already doing it, Miss Whitaker. You're teaching again. You're building something. You're not the same person who stepped off that stagecoach. How can you tell? You left your bedroom door open last night, and the night before, and you're sitting here with me, having a conversation, looking me in the eye. That's progress, whether you can see it or not. Lena considered this, testing the truth of it against her own internal landscape. He was right. The constant terror that had defined her first days at the ranch had dulled to a manageable anxiety. She no longer jumped at every sound or planned escape routes from every room. She slept through most nights without nightmares, small victories, but victories nonetheless. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For noticing, for caring enough to notice. Caleb looked uncomfortable with the gratitude, shifting his weight. We should head back before the rain hits. Those clouds are moving fast. They rode home through the first scattered drops of rainfall, arriving just as the sky opened up in earnest. Caleb pulled the wagon close to the house, and they both ran for the porch, laughing despite themselves as the rain soaked them through. Inside, Lana stood dripping on the floor, her hair coming loose from its pins, her dress clinging uncomfortably. Caleb was equally drenched, his shirt plastered to his shoulders, water running from his hair. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and something passed between them. Awareness, attraction, possibility. Lena felt her breath catch, felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold rain. Then Caleb cleared his throat and stepped back. I'll get the fire going. You should change into something dry. The moment broke, and Lena fled to her room, her heart hammering. She changed quickly, her hands trembling as she worked the buttons of her wet dress. When she emerged, Caleb had indeed gotten the fire going and was standing at a careful distance, still in his wet clothes. Your turn, she said. You'll catch your death in those wet things. I'll change in the barn. Don't be ridiculous. You can use the bedroom. I'll stay out here. Miss Whitaker, Lena. The word came out before she could stop it. You've been calling me Miss Whitaker for weeks now, and it feels formal. We live together. We work together. I think we can use first names. Caleb's expression softened. Lena, then. And you should call me Caleb. All right, Caleb. She tested the name, found it felt right in her mouth. Now go change before you freeze. He nodded and disappeared into the bedroom, emerging a few minutes later in dry clothes, his hair still damp and curling slightly. Lena had started preparing dinner, and they moved around each other in the small space with a growing ease that felt both natural and miraculous. As they ate, the rain continued to pound against the roof and windows, creating a cocoon of sound that made the house feel even smaller and more intimate. Lena found herself studying Caleb when she thought he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved with quiet competence, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. He was handsome in an understated way, she realized. Not flashy or dramatic, but solid and real. The kind of face that improved with familiarity rather than fading with it. You're staring, Caleb said without looking up from his plate. Lena startled, embarrassed at being caught. I was just thinking. About what? About how strange this all is. A month ago, I didn't know you existed. Now I'm sitting in your house, eating dinner, calling you by your first name, and it feels, she searched for the right word, it feels almost normal. Is that a good thing? I think so. Normal was something I'd given up hoping for. They finished dinner and Caleb insisted on cleaning up while Lena returned to her lesson planning. But instead of immediately heading to the barn as he usually did, he lingered, building up the fire and checking the windows against the storm. This rain might last through tomorrow, he observed. Creek will probably flood. We'll need to check the cattle in the morning, make sure none got stuck in low ground. I could help with that. Caleb looked surprised. You don't have to. I know, but I'd like to learn how the ranch works. If I'm going to live here, I should understand it. Something in his expression shifted, became almost tender. All right, we'll ride out together after breakfast. Caleb? Lena set down her pen. Earlier today in the wagon, when we were talking about the sleeping arrangements, I didn't mean to sound ungrateful or dismissive of what you've given up for my comfort. I know. I just want you to understand that it's not you. It's not that I find you unpleasant. It's just that I'm not ready. I may not be ready for a long time. Lena, Caleb moved closer, but stopped before entering her space. I need you to hear this. Really hear it. I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. Not now, not in a month, not ever, if that's how it works out. What we have here, this arrangement, it's enough. You don't owe me anything just because I'm treating you like a human being deserves to be treated. But the original agreement can be renegotiated, can be changed, can be whatever we both need it to be. His voice was firm, certain. You're not a commodity I purchased, Lena. You're a person who came here looking for safety and a new start. That's what I'm trying to give you. Nothing more, nothing less. Lena felt tears burning in her eyes again and let them fall this time. I don't know how to accept kindness without waiting for the price. Then I'll keep being kind until you learn, however long it takes. The simple promise undid something in Lena's chest, some knot of fear and resistance she'd been carrying so long it had become part of her structure. She crossed the distance between them without thinking, without planning, and did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged him. Caleb went rigid with surprise, his arms held awkwardly away from her body. For a heartbeat, Lena thought she'd made a terrible mistake, had pushed too far too fast. Then his arms came down carefully, gently, wrapping around her with a tenderness that made her throat ache. They stood like that for a long moment, the fire crackling beside them, the rain drumming on the roof. No words, no promises, just two lonely people holding each other against the dark. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying, though neither acknowledged it. Thank you, Lena whispered. Caleb just nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. He touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort and connection, then headed for the door. Caleb, Lena called as he reached the threshold. The barn is going to be cold and wet tonight. If you wanted to, you could sleep in the loft. It's warmer than the barn, and you'd be close if the storm gets worse. He turned back, surprise written across his face. Are you sure? I'm sure. And she was, to her own amazement. I trust you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Caleb's throat worked as he swallowed hard. All right, he said finally. I'll get my bedroll. That night, Lena lay in her room with the door cracked open, listening to the sounds of Caleb settling into the loft above. The old fear tried to rise, tried to convince her she'd made a mistake, that she was vulnerable now, that danger was near. But then she heard him sigh, heard the rustle of blankets as he got comfortable, heard his breathing slow and deepen into sleep. And somehow, the sound of another person's presence in the house didn't feel like a threat. It felt like coming home. The morning after the storm brought crystalline light and air so clean it hurt to breathe. Lena woke to the sound of Caleb moving quietly in the loft, gathering his things with the careful silence of someone trying not to disturb another person's rest. She lay still, listening, and realized with a start that she'd slept through the entire night without waking once in panic. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was already outside checking the damage from the rain. The yard was a maze of puddles reflecting the pale sky, and in the distance she could see where the creek had indeed overflowed its banks, spreading brown water across the low pasture. They rode out together after breakfast as promised, Lena on the gentle bay mare and Caleb on his big roan gelding. He showed her how to scan for cattle in trouble, how to read the landscape for signs of danger, how to move stock away from flooded ground. She absorbed it all with the same focused attention she'd once given to lesson planning, asking questions and taking mental notes. "You're a quick study," Caleb observed as they paused on a rise overlooking the main herd. "I like understanding how things work. It makes me feel less helpless." "You've never been helpless, Lena. You just spent time with people who tried to convince you that you were." She looked at him sharply, struck by the insight. "How did you know that?" "Because I watched my sister go through something similar, just in a different way. People kept telling her medicine wasn't for women, that she was reaching beyond her station, that she'd fail and embarrass herself. They tried to make her believe she was helpless to change her circumstances." He smiled sadly. "But she wasn't, and neither are you." The conversation stayed with Lena as they returned to the ranch. Over the following weeks, as summer deepened into its full heat, she threw herself into preparing for the school with an intensity that surprised them both. The line shack transformed from a rough shelter into a proper classroom, complete with desks, a blackboard Caleb had hauled from town, and shelves filled with books and supplies. Word spread among the scattered homesteads carried by Caleb on his visits to neighboring ranches. One by one, families committed to sending their children. The Morrison kids, ranging from 6 to 14. The 3 Harris children. Old Man Chen's grandsons, who spoke more Cantonese than English, but were eager to learn. Even the widow Johnson agreed to send her twin daughters, though the journey would be long. The school was set to open the first Monday in September, which gave Lena exactly 3 weeks to finalize her curriculum and prepare herself mentally for the challenge ahead. She worked with a driven focus that left little room for doubt, but at night, lying in her room, the old fears crept back in. What if her brother had been right? What if she wasn't capable? What if the children mocked her appearance, her body, her presumption in thinking she could teach them anything? On one such night, unable to sleep, Lena rose and moved quietly to the main room. She was surprised to find lamplight still burning and Caleb sitting at the table, working over what looked like account books. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Too much thinking." Lena moved to the stove where coffee still sat warm. "You?" "Trying to figure out if I can afford to buy breeding stock next spring without selling off half the herd." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "The numbers aren't cooperating." Lena poured coffee for both of them and settled into the chair across from him. Without asking, she pulled the account book toward her and began scanning the columns. Her mind, trained in figures from her teaching days, quickly identified inefficiencies and opportunities. "You're selling your calves too early," she said after a moment. "If you held them through winter and sold in spring, you'd get better prices, and you're paying too much for feed. There's a supplier in Laramie who runs cheaper." Caleb stared at her. "How do you know about the Laramie supplier?" "I read the territorial newspaper you bring back from town. The advertisements are quite informative." She made a few quick calculations in the margin. "If you adjust your selling schedule and switch suppliers, you could save enough to buy 2 breeding cows instead of 1, maybe 3 if the market holds." "Lena Whitaker, you never cease to amaze me." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I told you I was good with figures. You just never asked me to prove it. Consider yourself officially in charge of the ranch accounts." Caleb pushed the book fully toward her. "You've got a better head for this than I do." "I couldn't possibly." "You could, and you should. We're partners in this enterprise, aren't we? Might as well make use of all our combined skills." The word partners settled into Lena's chest with unexpected warmth. Not wife, not dependent, not charity case. Partners. "All right," she said. "But I expect you to actually listen when I tell you we can't afford something." "Deal." They worked together for another hour, Lena reorganizing the accounts while Caleb explained the various expenses and income streams. By the time they finally retired for the night, the ranch's financial picture looked considerably brighter, and something between them had shifted again. Another wall coming down, another layer of trust being built. The weeks before the school opening passed in a blur of preparation. Lena made final adjustments to her lesson plans, arranged the classroom furniture multiple times until the layout felt right, and practiced her opening speech to the empty room until she could deliver it without her voice shaking. Caleb continued sleeping in the loft rather than returning to the barn, an arrangement that had evolved naturally and without discussion. Some mornings Lena woke to find fresh wildflowers on the table. Other times she rose early enough to make breakfast before he came down the ladder, and they'd eat together as the sun rose, talking about the day ahead or sitting in comfortable silence. The intimacy of it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. They moved around each other with increasing ease, their routines meshing like gears in a well-made clock. Sometimes their hands would brush as they reached for the same item, or they'd find themselves standing close enough to feel each other's warmth, and the air between them would thicken with possibility. But Caleb never pushed, never demanded, never took more than she offered. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Lena began to offer more. She stopped locking her bedroom door. She began sitting closer to him at meals. She let conversations drift into personal territory, sharing memories and fears she'd never spoken aloud. And one evening, when exhaustion overwhelmed her while they worked together at the table, she let her head rest against his shoulder without immediately pulling away. Caleb went very still, barely breathing, as if afraid any movement would shatter the moment. Then slowly, carefully, he shifted so she could rest more comfortably, and they stayed like that until the lamp burned low and Lena's breathing evened into sleep. When she woke in the morning, she was in her bed with no memory of how she'd gotten there, but she knew Caleb must have carried her. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a tentative, fragile joy. 3 days before the school was set to open, everything changed. Lena was at the line shack making final preparations when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Caleb riding hard, his face grim in a way that sent immediate alarm through her system. "What's wrong?" she called as he dismounted. "Letter came for you." He held out an envelope, and Lena's blood turned to ice when she saw the return address, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The same aggressive handwriting as before. "My brother," she whispered. "Don't have to read it if you don't want to. We can burn it like the last one." But something in Lena knew she couldn't run from this forever. With shaking hands, she took the envelope and tore it open. The letter inside was brief, brutal, and exactly what she'd feared. "Sister, I have learned of your current location through my inquiries with the Territorial Mail Service. Your disgraceful flight and subsequent behavior have brought shame upon our family name. I am coming to collect you and return you to Pennsylvania where you belong. Expect my arrival within the fortnight. Do not attempt to flee again, as I have secured the cooperation of local authorities in returning runaway dependents to their rightful guardians. Your brother, Marcus Whitaker." The paper slipped from Lena's fingers and drifted to the floor. All the strength she'd built over the past month seemed to drain out of her in an instant, leaving her hollow and terrified. "He's coming," she said, her voice barely audible. "He found me. He's coming to take me back." Caleb retrieved the letter and read it quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. "The hell he is. You don't understand. He has legal rights as my guardian. I'm unmarried, I have no independent means, and he's my closest male relative. The law is on his side. The law can be challenged. Not by someone like me, not against someone like him." Lena felt the old panic rising, threatening to swallow her whole. "He'll drag me back to Pennsylvania. He'll lock me away. He'll make sure I never teach again, never have any freedom, never—" "Lena." Caleb gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. No one enters my land unless you allow it. Do you understand? No one. I don't care what legal authority he claims or what papers he waves around. If you don't want him here, he doesn't get to be here. You can't stop him. He'll bring the law with him. Then let him bring it. We'll see how cooperative the local sheriff is when I explain that your brother beats women and calls it guardianship." Caleb's voice was hard as granite. "You're not going back, Lena. Not unless you choose to go. But I don't have any legal standing, any rights. You would if we were married." The words hung between them like a thunderclap. Lena stared at him, trying to process what he'd just suggested. "Caleb, we can't. I'm not talking about a real marriage. Not yet. Not unless you want it to be." He spoke quickly, urgently. "I'm talking about a legal document that says you're my wife, which means your brother has no more claim over you. We'd be married on paper, nothing more. You'd still have your room, your privacy, your choices, but he couldn't touch you. That's not fair to you. Let me decide what's fair to me. Caleb's hands were still on her shoulders, steady and warm. You came here looking for safety and freedom. I promised you both. This is how I keep that promise. Lena searched his face, looking for doubt or resentment or ulterior motives. She found only fierce determination and something that might have been fear, not of her, but for her. Why would you do this? She asked. Why would you bind yourself legally to someone who can't be a true wife to you? Because you matter, Lena. Your safety matters. Your teaching matters. The life you're building here matters. And I'll be damned if I let some petty tyrant destroy all of that just because he's too small to handle a woman with a mind of her own. Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. I don't deserve your protection. You deserve so much more than what you've been given, and maybe I can't give you everything you deserve, but I can give you this. He released her shoulders and stepped back, giving her space. Think about it. You've got time. He said a fortnight. That's 2 weeks. We can ride to town tomorrow and be married by the justice of the peace before he ever arrives. And if I say no, then we find another way to protect you. There's always another way. Caleb bent to retrieve his hat, which had fallen when he'd grabbed her. But Lena, you need to understand something. I'm not offering this out of pity or obligation. I'm offering it because in the past months, you've become the most important part of my life. This ranch was just land and buildings before you arrived. Now it's a home, and I'll fight to protect that home and the woman who made it one. He left then, mounting his horse and riding back toward the ranch, leaving Lena standing alone in the schoolhouse with her thoughts in chaos. She tried to return to her preparations, but concentration was impossible. Her mind spun through scenarios, each worse than the last. Marcus arriving with legal documents and lawmen, Marcus dragging her back to Pennsylvania, Marcus destroying the school, ruining her reputation, ensuring she could never teach again. Or worse, Marcus destroying Caleb for daring to harbor her. Her brother was vindictive enough to pursue charges against anyone who aided her flight. The thought of Caleb suffering because of her was unbearable. By the time Lena returned to the ranch house that evening, her decision was made. She found Caleb in the barn, tending to the horses with methodical focus that suggested he was using work to avoid thinking. Caleb, she called from the doorway. He turned, saw her face, and set down the brush he'd been using. What did you decide? I'll marry you. On paper, I mean. For legal protection. The words came out rushed, nervous. But you need to understand what you're agreeing to. I can't promise I'll ever be ready for more than that. I can't promise. I don't need promises, Lena. I just need to know you're safe. We'll go to town tomorrow? First thing in the morning. Caleb moved closer, and in the dim light of the barn, his expression was soft with relief. Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for offering it. Lena twisted her hands together. I know this isn't the marriage you hoped for when you answered that advertisement. It's not what I expected, Caleb admitted, but it's better in ways I never could have imagined. You're better than anything I hoped for, Lena Whitaker. Even if all we ever are is partners on paper, that's still more than most people get in a lifetime. The next morning dawned clear and bright, mocking the gravity of what they were about to do. Lena dressed in her best dress, still the gray one she'd arrived in, though she'd mended and cleaned it until it looked almost new. Caleb wore his Sunday clothes, his hair slicked back and his jaw freshly shaved. They rode to town in the wagon, both silent with nerves and the weight of what this meant. The justice of the peace, a practical man named Henderson who'd seen enough frontier marriages to not ask unnecessary questions, conducted the ceremony with efficient brevity. Do you, Caleb Turner, take this woman as your lawful wedded wife? I do. And do you, Lena Whitaker, take this man as your lawful wedded husband? Lena's throat was dry, but she forced out the words. I do. By the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. That'll be $2. That was it. No kiss, no celebration, no witnesses beyond Henderson's board clerk. Just a signature in a registry book, and a piece of paper that changed everything and nothing. On the ride home, Caleb finally broke the silence. I know this wasn't exactly a romantic ceremony. I don't need romance. I need safety. You have it. Legally now, and in every other way I can manage. He glanced at her. Nothing else changes. You keep your room, your independence, your choices. This is just armor against your brother, nothing more. Until he arrives and challenges it. Then we deal with that when it comes. The 2 weeks before Marcus's August of Lena's life, she threw herself into final preparations for the school, using work to keep the panic at bay. Caleb continued with ranch duties but stayed closer to the house, his rifle always within reach even though he never mentioned it. Lena found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, this man who'd married her to protect her from harm. He'd asked for nothing in return, demanded no intimacy, claimed no husband's rights. He simply continued being Caleb, steady, kind, impossibly decent. One evening, a week after the wedding, Lena found herself standing in the doorway of her bedroom, looking out at where Caleb sat working on leather tack by lamplight. He looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. "Everything all right?" "I was just thinking that I should stop calling you Caleb when we're alone." He set down the tack, confused. "What should you call me?" "Husband." The word felt strange in her mouth, weighted with meaning. "We're married now. Even if it's just on paper, it's real enough. And you've been more of a husband to me in kindness and respect than most men are to the wives they claim to love." Caleb's expression softened into something dangerously close to tenderness. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, Lena. But if you're going to call me husband, then I should call you wife. Is that what I am to you? You're my partner, my friend, the person who makes this house a home." He paused. "And yes, you're my wife. Maybe not in all the ways that usually means, but in the ways that matter most." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I could be more for you." "You're enough exactly as you are." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Then Lena made a decision that surprised them both. She crossed the room and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tell me about your sister," she said. "I want to know her better." So Caleb talked, his voice soft with memory and grief, painting pictures of a girl who'd been fierce and brilliant and stolen too soon. Lena listened, occasionally asking questions, and somewhere in the sharing of his pain, something between them deepened further. When they finally retired for the night, Lena paused at her bedroom door. "Caleb, thank you for marrying me. I know I didn't say that before, but I'm grateful. You don't need to thank me for doing what's right. Still, thank you." She closed the door but didn't lock it, and through the thin wall she could hear Caleb moving around the main room before climbing to the loft. The sounds were becoming familiar, comforting, and as Lena drifted toward sleep, she realized she no longer felt like a refugee in this house. She felt like she belonged. The morning Marcus Whitaker arrived came exactly on schedule, 14 days after his letter. Lena was at the schoolhouse arranging primers for the children who would arrive the following Monday when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Her hands froze on the books, fear flooding through her system. She moved to the window and saw 3 riders coming up the road, and her brother was unmistakable even at a distance. Tall, severe, sitting his horse like he owned the world beneath it. The other 2 riders wore badges. Lena's breath came short and fast as panic threatened to overwhelm her. Marcus had brought the law, just as he'd threatened. He would take her back. All of this, the school, the freedom, the fragile peace she'd built, would be destroyed. Then she heard another horse, riding hard from the direction of the ranch. Caleb appeared, positioning himself between the schoolhouse and the approaching riders. He'd seen them coming and had ridden to intercept them before they could reach Lena. Lena forced herself to breathe, to think. She'd spent 2 months learning to trust Caleb's protection. Now was the time to test whether that trust was justified. She stepped out onto the schoolhouse porch just as the riders pulled up where Caleb blocked the road. Marcus Whitaker was exactly as she remembered, dark hair graying at the temples, cold eyes, a mouth that seemed permanently set in disapproval. He looked at Caleb with obvious disdain. "I'm looking for Lena Whitaker. I was told she might be found at this location." "That would be Lena Turner," Caleb said quietly, "and you're on private property." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Turner? She's married?" "As of 2 weeks ago, I'm her husband, Caleb Turner, and you'd be the brother she left behind in Pennsylvania. I'm her legal guardian." "We're her guardian." Past tense. She's married now, which means I'm the only legal authority in her life. Caleb's voice was calm but hard as iron. So I'll ask you again, what are you doing on my property? One of the lawmen, an older man with a sheriff's badge, cleared his throat. Mr. Whitaker here claims his sister was coerced into leaving Pennsylvania, says she's not of sound mind to make her own decisions. He's asking for our help in returning her to his care. And I'm telling you, my wife is exactly where she wants to be, doing exactly what she wants to do. Sound mind, sound body, and sound in her decision to marry me and stay here. I'd like to hear that from the lady herself, the sheriff said, his tone suggesting he was already skeptical of Marcus's claims. Then ask her. She's right there. Caleb gestured toward the schoolhouse without taking his eyes off Marcus. All heads turned toward Lena, and she felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. This was the moment, the choice that would determine everything. She could fold, could let her brother's presence intimidate her back into the small, frightened creature she'd been, could accept his authority and return to Pennsylvania and a life of diminishment. Or she could stand. Lena straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked down the schoolhouse steps. She crossed the dusty ground until she stood beside Caleb, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and was pleased to hear her voice come out steady. "Lena." Marcus's expression was thunderous. "What is the meaning of this charade? Marriage to some frontier nobody? Teaching in a shack? This is absurd." "This is my life, the one I chose for myself. You don't know what's good for you. You never have. That's why you need proper guidance, proper supervision. What I needed was safety from you." The words came easier than Lena expected. What I needed was a life where I wasn't constantly diminished and controlled and beaten for having opinions. Marcus's face flushed dark red. "I never beat you. I disciplined you appropriately when your behavior warranted it." "You broke my ribs, Marcus. You gave me a concussion that left me unable to read for 3 weeks. You locked me in a cellar for 2 days without food because I dared to apply for a teaching position." Lena's voice rose, powered by months of suppressed rage. "That's not discipline, that's cruelty, and I will not subject myself to it ever again." The sheriff and his deputy exchanged glances, and Marcus noticed. "She's lying," he said quickly. "She's always been prone to exaggeration and dramatics. That's part of her mental instability." "I have scars," Lena said flatly. "From the beatings, from the times he threw me downstairs, from the night he broke a chair across my back. Would you like to see them, Sheriff? Would you like medical testimony about the injuries I carried when I arrived in Wyoming?" "That won't be necessary, ma'am." The sheriff's tone had shifted, becoming protective rather than suspicious. "Mr. Whitaker, I think we've heard enough. Your sister is of legal age, married, and clearly making her own informed choices. Unless you have evidence of actual coercion or incompetence, I don't see grounds to interfere. But she's my responsibility. She's her husband's responsibility now. That's how the law works." The sheriff touched his hat. "Mrs. Turner, Mr. Turner, apologies for the intrusion. We'll be heading back to town." Marcus wasn't finished. "This isn't over, Lena. I'll find legal recourse. I'll expose this sham marriage and drag you back where you belong." "You're welcome to try." Caleb spoke for the first time since Lena had joined him, his voice cold as winter. "But while you're working on that, know this. If you set foot on my land again without invitation, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. If you threaten my wife in any way, I'll make sure every person in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. And if you ever raise your hand to her again, I'll make sure it's the last thing you do." The threat hung in the air, backed by the quiet certainty in Caleb's voice. Marcus looked between them, clearly searching for weakness, for some crack he could exploit. He found none. "You'll regret this," Marcus said finally, directing his words at Lena. "Both of you will regret defying me." "The only thing I regret," Lena said, "is not having the courage to leave you sooner. Now get off our land." Marcus jerked his horse around and rode off at a gallop, the lawmen following at a more measured pace. The sheriff tipped his hat one more time as he passed. "Ma'am, if that man gives you any more trouble, you come to town and file a report. We take threats seriously in these parts." "Thank you, Sheriff." They watched until the riders disappeared over the horizon. Only then did Lena's legs begin to shake, reaction setting in now that the confrontation was over. I did it, she whispered. I stood up to him. I actually stood up to him. You were magnificent. Caleb turned to her, his eyes bright with pride and something deeper. I've never seen anyone braver. I was terrified. Being brave means doing it anyway. And you did it, Lena. You sent him away. The reality of it crashed over her. She'd won. Marcus was gone, powerless to drag her back, defeated by her own strength and the legal protection of her marriage. All the fears she'd carried for so long began to crack and crumble, making room for something else. Joy. Pure, unexpected, overwhelming joy. Lena started laughing, high and bright, powered by relief and triumph. Then she was crying, then laughing again, and Caleb was holding her as she cycled through every emotion she'd suppressed for months. It's over, she kept saying. It's really over. He can't hurt me anymore. Never again, Caleb promised. Not while I'm alive. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped together in the dusty road, while the Wyoming sun beat down and the wind whispered through the grass. When Lena finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, but her smile was radiant. I need to finish setting up the school, she said. The children come Monday, and I want everything perfect. I'll help you. They worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon, arranging furniture and organizing materials and planning the first day of lessons. The confrontation with Marcus seemed to have burned away the last of Lena's hesitation, and she moved through the space with new confidence, claiming it fully as her own. As evening approached and they prepared to return to the ranch, Lena paused in the schoolhouse doorway, looking back at the room she'd created. This is mine, she said wonderingly. Not because someone allowed it or approved it, but because I built it, because I claimed it. That's right, Caleb agreed. All yours. You're Lena Turner, teacher, and nobody can take that away from you. Lena turned to him, this man who'd given her safety and freedom and the space to become herself again. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. For everything you've done, everything you've given me. You've given me just as much, maybe more. Caleb stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes. You brought life back to this place, Lena. Purpose and warmth and hope. That's worth more than I can say. Something shifted in the air between them, familiar and new at the same time. Lena felt her heart speed up, felt awareness prickle across her skin. For the first time in her life, she wanted to close the distance between herself and another person, not out of obligation or fear, but out of genuine desire. But the moment passed, and they returned to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. That night, Lena lay in her room with the door wide open, listening to Caleb move around the house, and felt something settle deep in her chest. She was safe. She was free. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And for the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to believe that happiness might actually be possible. The weekend before the school opened, Lena woke before dawn with her stomach in knots. She lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of Caleb stirring in the loft, and tried to calm the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. In just 2 days, children would arrive expecting her to be their teacher, to guide them, to be worthy of their trust and their parents' faith. What if she wasn't ready? What if Marcus had been right about her inadequacy? She forced herself out of bed and dressed quickly, her hands trembling as she buttoned her dress. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was already at the stove, coffee brewing and the smell of frying bacon filling the air. "You're up early," he observed, glancing at her with concern. "Couldn't sleep?" Too much thinking. Lena moved to the table and sat heavily. Monday keeps getting closer, and I keep wondering if I'm fooling myself, if I'm really capable of doing this. Caleb set a plate in front of her and took the chair across from her, his expression serious. "Tell me something. When you taught in Philadelphia, were you good at it?" "I thought so. The students seemed to respond well, and my evaluations were positive." "And has anything fundamental changed about you since then? Are you less intelligent, less patient, less knowledgeable?" "No, but nothing." Caleb leaned forward. "The only thing that's different is that your brother spent years trying to convince you that you weren't good enough. But he was wrong then, and he's wrong now. You're the same person who earned those positive evaluations, Lena. You just forgot how to trust yourself." "What if the children don't respect me?" What if their parents hear about my background, my body, my... Stop. The word was gentle but firm. You're doing it again. You're letting Marcus's voice speak for you. But he's gone, Lena. He has no power here. The only voice that matters is yours. Lena looked down at her untouched breakfast, fighting tears. I'm scared. I know, but you're also ready. And you won't be alone in this. Those families want their children to learn, and they're grateful someone with your education is willing to teach them. They don't care about anything else. You can't know that. I can, and I do. Because I've talked to them, and not one person has expressed anything but enthusiasm and appreciation. Caleb reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You're going to be brilliant on Monday, just like you were in Philadelphia, just like you'll be every day after. Trust yourself the way I trust you. The warmth of his hand on hers, the absolute certainty in his voice, steadied something in Lena's chest. She turned her palm up and squeezed his fingers briefly before pulling away. Thank you, she whispered. Always. They spent Saturday doing final preparations at the schoolhouse. Caleb helped Lena arrange the desks one last time, mounted a large map of the United States on one wall, and built a simple shelf system for students to store their lunch pails. Lena organized her teaching materials, wrote the week's schedule on the blackboard in careful script, and placed a bouquet of wildflowers on her desk. By late afternoon, everything was ready. The schoolhouse looked warm and welcoming, a far cry from the dilapidated line shack it had been just months ago. Lena stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in, and felt pride swell in her chest. It's perfect, Caleb said from the doorway. Better than any school I ever attended. You really think so? I know so. Those children are lucky to have you. On Sunday, Lena tried to distract herself with household tasks, but found concentration impossible. She cleaned things that were already clean, reorganized supplies that didn't need reorganizing, and generally drove herself half mad with nervous energy. Caleb, recognizing her state, suggested they ride out to check the cattle, and Lena seized on the activity gratefully. They spent the afternoon ranging across the ranch, the familiar rhythm of horses and open sky helping to calm her racing thoughts. As they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley, Caleb pulled a small package from his saddlebag and handed it to Lena. What's this? She asked, surprised. A gift. For tomorrow. Open it. Inside the brown paper wrapping, Lena found a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages crisp and unmarked, and a fine fountain pen with delicate floral engraving. It's for your teaching notes, Caleb explained. Observations about the students, lesson plans, whatever you need. My mother kept journals when she taught me, and she always said writing things down helped her be a better teacher. Lena ran her fingers over the smooth leather, emotion clogging her throat. This is too fine. You shouldn't have spent... You're my wife. I'm allowed to give you gifts. He said it matter-of-factly, but there was warmth in his eyes. Besides, every teacher needs good tools. Consider it an investment in the education of Wyoming's next generation. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it, that's all I want. Lena clutched the journal to her chest. I will, every day. I promise. They rode home in the golden light of late afternoon, and when they reached the ranch, Lena impulsively rose on her toes and kissed Caleb's cheek. Thank you, she said, for everything, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Caleb's hand came up to touch the place where her lips had been, his expression stunned and tender. You're welcome, he managed. That night, Lena lay awake long past midnight, the journal on the nightstand beside her bed. Through the open door, she could hear Caleb's breathing from the loft, steady and reassuring. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow she would step fully into the life she'd built here, claim the identity she'd fought so hard to protect. She was terrified. She was ready. She was both at once, and somehow that felt exactly right. Monday morning arrived with cruel swiftness. Lena dressed in her best dress, a new one Caleb had insisted on buying during their last trip to town, deep blue with simple white trim that made her feel both professional and feminine. She pinned her hair back severely, then loosened it slightly when she caught sight of her reflection and heard Marcus's voice in her head criticizing her appearance. No, not today. Today she would look how she wanted to look, be who she wanted to be. Caleb was waiting in the kitchen with coffee and toast. though Lena's stomach was too knotted to eat much. He studied her carefully, reading the anxiety in every line of her body. "You look perfect," he said, like exactly what a teacher should look like. "I feel like I might be sick." "That's normal. My mother used to say the day she stopped being nervous before teaching was the day she should quit, because it meant she'd stopped caring." Lena managed a weak smile. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was, and she would have recognized that same wisdom in you." Caleb stood and held out his hand. "Come on, I'll drive you to the schoolhouse." "You don't have to." "I want to. Besides, I want to see the children's faces when they walk into that beautiful classroom you've created." They arrived at the schoolhouse an hour before classes were set to begin. Lena used the time to arrange and rearrange items on her desk, check the stove, write her name on the blackboard in careful letters, Mrs. Turner. The formality of it still felt strange, but also grounding. She wasn't Lena Whitaker anymore, helpless, dependent, and victim. She was Lena Turner, teacher and wife and woman who'd built her own future. At precisely 8 o'clock, the first family arrived. The Morrisons came in a loaded wagon, all 4 children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Mrs. Morrison, a weathered woman with kind eyes, approached Lena with obvious nervousness. "Mrs. Turner, I'm Sally Morrison. These are my children, Emma, Thomas, Sarah, and little James." Lena felt her teacher's instincts kick in, overriding her anxiety. She crouched down to be at eye level with the youngest, a gap-toothed boy who stared at her with open curiosity. "Hello, James. Are you excited to learn to read?" "Ma says reading is magic, says I can go anywhere in the world through books." "Your ma is absolutely right, and I'm going to teach you how to work that magic." Lena straightened and smiled at Sally Morrison. "Thank you for trusting me with your children's education. Thank you for being willing to teach them. We've been praying for someone like you to come to this territory." Other families began arriving. The Harris children came on horseback, the eldest helping the younger 2 dismount. Old Man Chen delivered his grandsons personally, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw the schoolhouse. "You make good school," he said in halting English. "Boys will learn. Will make me proud." The widow Johnson arrived last, her twin daughters holding hands and staring at everything with wide eyes. By 8:30, 11 children ranging in age from 6 to 15 sat at the desks Caleb had built, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Lena stood at the front of the classroom, the morning light streaming through the windows Caleb had installed, and looked at these children who'd been entrusted to her care. For a moment, fear threatened to swallow her whole. Then she saw Caleb standing just outside the open door, watching her with absolute confidence, and something settled in her chest. "Good morning, students," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Mrs. Turner, and I'm honored to be your teacher. We're going to do something special here. We're going to learn together, grow together, and discover that education is the key to freedom and possibility. No matter where you come from, no matter what anyone has told you about what you can or cannot achieve, in this classroom, you are all capable of greatness." The children sat straighter, caught by the conviction in her voice. "Now," Lena continued, picking up a piece of chalk, "let's begin with something simple. Who can tell me what this is?" A small hand shot up. Emma Morrison, the eldest daughter. "That's a letter A, ma'am." "Excellent. And what sound does it make?" As the children called out answers and Lena began writing on the blackboard, she felt something click into place. This was who she was meant to be. Not her brother's victim, not a burden, not someone who needed to apologize for existing. She was a teacher, and these children needed her. The morning flew by in a blur of lessons and exercises. Lena divided the students into groups based on skill level, giving the older children more advanced work while focusing foundational skills with the younger ones. She was surprised by how quickly they learned, how eager they were to please her, how they hung on her every word. By lunchtime, when the children scattered outside to eat the meals their parents had packed, Lena was exhausted but exhilarated. She stepped onto the porch to find Caleb still there, sitting on the steps he'd built. "You stayed," she said, surprised. "Couldn't leave. Had to see how it went." He stood, searching her face. "How do you feel?" "Like I just remembered how to breathe after holding my breath for 2 years." Lena laughed, the sound bright and free. They're wonderful, Caleb. Smart and curious and so hungry to learn. I don't know what I was so afraid of. I told you that you were ready. You did. I should have listened. She watched the children playing in the yard, chasing each other and laughing. Thank you for making this possible, for building this place, for protecting me, for giving me the chance to be myself again. You did the hard part. I just provided the walls. The afternoon session went even better than the morning. Lena introduced geography, showing the children where they lived on the large map and explaining the vastness of the world beyond Wyoming. She saw their eyes widen with wonder, saw their minds opening to possibilities they'd never considered. When 3 o'clock came and parents began arriving to collect their children, Lena was surrounded by enthusiastic reports. Teacher knows everything, little James Morrison announced to his mother. She made learning fun, one of the Harris boys added. Not like when Pa tries to teach us. Old Man Chen's grandsons, who'd been quiet during class, approached Lena shyly as their grandfather waited. You good teacher, the elder one said carefully. We come back tomorrow. I'll be here, Lena promised. After the last family departed and the schoolhouse stood empty, Lena sank into her chair and let the full weight of the day wash over her. She'd done it. She'd taught again, and it had been everything she remembered and more. Caleb appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smile playing at his lips. How does it feel to be Wyoming's finest educator? It feels like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd lost. Lena looked around the classroom. I was good at this, wasn't I? Today, I mean. I didn't imagine it. You were magnificent. Those children adore you already. They trust me. That's a responsibility I don't take lightly. I know you don't. That's what makes you perfect for this. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, both tired but content. When they arrived, Lena noticed something different immediately. Smoke rising from the chimney and the smell of cooking food drifting from the open door. Did you prepare dinner before you left this morning? She asked. I did. Figured you'd be too tired to cook after your first day. Caleb helped her down from the wagon. It's nothing fancy, just stew, but it's hot and ready. Lena felt emotion swell in her chest again. Every day, in 100 small ways, Caleb showed her what partnership looked like. Not grand gestures or flowery words, but steady consideration and care. They ate dinner together, and Lena found herself talking freely about the day, about each student's personality, about lesson plans for the rest of the week, about her hopes and concerns. Caleb listened intently, asking questions and offering observations that showed he genuinely cared about her work. After dinner, while Lena worked on notes in her new journal, Caleb tended to ranch business at the other end of the table. They worked in companionable silence, occasionally sharing thoughts or observations, and the domesticity of it struck Lena with unexpected force. This was marriage, she realized. Not the violent control Marcus had modeled, not the transaction she'd feared when she'd answered that advertisement. This was partnership, mutual respect, two people building a life together based on trust and care. Caleb, she said suddenly, setting down her pen. He looked up from the account books. Yes? I've been thinking about something. About us. His expression became carefully neutral. All right. When we got married, it was for legal protection, a way to keep Marcus from dragging me back to Pennsylvania, and you said it would be a marriage in name only, that you wouldn't expect anything from me beyond what I was willing to give. That's still true, Caleb said quickly. Nothing's changed on my end, Lena. I meant what I promised. I know you did. But something has changed on my end. She took a breath, gathering courage. I don't want a marriage in name only anymore. I want something real. With you. Caleb went very still, barely breathing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I trust you, not just with my safety or my legal status, but with myself, with all of me. Lena's hands twisted together in her lap. I'm saying that when I think about my future, you're in it. Not as an obligation or a necessity, but as someone I choose, someone I want. Lena. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. Are you sure? Because I don't want you to feel pressured or like you owe me anything. What we have now is good. It's enough. I don't need... I'm not saying this out of obligation. Lena stood and crossed to where he sat, surprising herself with her boldness. I'm saying it because for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to be chosen for who I am, not what I can provide or how I can serve. You chose me when I was broken and afraid. You protected me without demanding payment. You gave me space to heal and grow, and now I'm choosing you back. Caleb rose to meet her, his hands trembling as he reached out to cup her face. I've wanted to hear you say that for months, but I was terrified to hope for it. Hope for it, Lena whispered. Hope for all of it. Because I'm done being afraid, Caleb. I'm done letting my past dictate my future. I want to build something new with you, something real and lasting and ours. But he kissed her then, gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious that might shatter. Lena felt tears slip down her cheeks as she kissed him back, pouring months of gratitude and growing affection into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and smiling at once. I don't know how to be a proper wife, Lena admitted. I don't know how to do this without fear or hesitation. I might need time. I might need patience. We have all the time in the world, Caleb assured her. And I have enough patience for both of us. We'll figure this out together, at whatever pace feels right. No rush, no pressure, just us learning each other. Together, Lena repeated, testing the word. It felt solid, promising. They stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing. About the school, the ranch, their hopes for the future. About Caleb's parents and sister. About Lena's childhood before Marcus's cruelty had warped everything. They shared memories and dreams, building a foundation of intimacy that went beyond physical touch. When Lena finally retired to her bedroom, she paused at the threshold and looked back at Caleb. You don't have to sleep in the loft anymore, she said quietly. Unless you want to. But if you wanted to be closer, the door will be open. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes, followed by fierce tenderness. Are you sure? I'm sure. I want you close, Caleb. Not because I'm afraid or because I think I should, but because being near you makes me feel safe and cherished and whole. That night, for the first time, they fell asleep in the same room. Caleb in the rocking chair he'd pulled near the bed, Lena under the quilts, both of them reaching across the space between to hold hands as sleep claimed them. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm, one that wove together all the threads of their separate lives into a single shared tapestry. Lena taught Monday through Friday, pouring her heart into educating the children who arrived each morning, eager to learn. The students flourished under her care, their reading improving rapidly, their mathematical skills growing, their understanding of the wider world expanding. Parents began stopping by to thank her personally, bringing gifts of food or handmade items. Sally Morrison brought preserves and honey. Old Man Chen delivered fresh vegetables from his garden. The widow Johnson sewed Lena a new apron, beautifully embroidered with flowers. The children talk about you constantly, Mrs. Johnson said as she presented the gift. You've given them something I could never provide, hope that they can be more than just ranch hands and homesteaders. They dream now, Mrs. Turner. They dream of colleges and professions and possibilities. The words struck deep, validating everything Lena had hoped to accomplish. She was making a difference, not just in the children's education, but in their sense of what their lives could be. At home, things with Caleb progressed slowly but steadily. They grew more comfortable with casual affection, a hand on the shoulder, a brief embrace, stolen kisses when the moment felt right. Lena marveled at how natural it all felt, how different from the fear and revulsion she'd anticipated based on her brother's treatment. Caleb was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace, celebrating small victories of intimacy without pushing for more. Some nights they fell asleep holding hands. Other nights Lena curled against his chest, finding comfort in the steady beat of his heart. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building a partnership based on trust and mutual respect. 6 weeks after the school opened, Lena stood at the fence line watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The day had been particularly good. Emma Morrison had read an entire chapter book aloud without help, and the Chen boys had solved complex arithmetic problems that would have challenged students twice their age. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. about how different my life looks now compared to 6 months ago. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was so broken I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. I thought I was running to the end of the world to hide. And now? Now I realize I wasn't running to hide. I was running toward this, toward you, toward the school, toward becoming the person I was always meant to be. She turned in his arms to face him. You gave me that, Caleb. You gave me myself back. You did that work yourself, Lena. I just provided a safe place for it to happen. You provided more than that. You provided belief when I had none, hope when I'd given up on it, love when I thought I was unlovable. Caleb's expression softened. You were never unlovable. You were just surrounded by people too broken to recognize your worth. They stood together in the gathering twilight, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Lena felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. Not the numbness of resignation, but the genuine tranquility that came from being exactly where she belonged. I love you, she said, the words spilling out unbidden but utterly true. I don't know when it happened or how, but I love you, Caleb Turner, completely and without reservation. Caleb's breath caught. Lena, I know we started this as a practical arrangement. I know we got married for legal protection, not love, but somewhere along the way, while you were being patient and kind and giving me space to heal, I fell in love with you, and I needed you to know that. I love you too, Caleb said fiercely. I think I started falling the moment you stepped off that stage with bruises on your face and fire in your eyes. I've just been waiting for you to feel safe enough to hear it. They kissed as the stars multiplied overhead, pouring months of careful restraint and growing affection into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. Take me inside, Lena whispered, not because it's expected or required, but because I want to. Because I choose you, Caleb. I choose this life, this love, this future we're building together. Caleb lifted her into his arms, not because she couldn't walk, but because the gesture felt right, romantic, celebratory. He carried her across the threshold of the house they'd transformed into a home, and Lena laughed with pure joy. That night, they became husband and wife in truth as well as in law, the joining tender and meaningful and utterly their own. Lena discovered that intimacy didn't have to be frightening or painful, that in the right hands, Caleb's hands, it could be beautiful and affirming and sweet. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms with moonlight streaming through the window, Lena felt the last chains of her past finally break and fall away. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me exactly as I am. Thank you for having the courage to stay, for building a life here, for becoming my wife in every sense of the word. Caleb pressed a kiss to her forehead. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lena Turner. We're the best thing that ever happened to each other, Lena corrected. And lying there in the darkness, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd built together, the house they shared, the school she taught in, the ranch they managed as partners, Lena finally understood what home meant. It wasn't a place. It was a person. It was Caleb, and the safety and love and respect he offered freely every single day. She'd come to Wyoming running from violence and shame, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found purpose, dignity, freedom, and a love so profound it had transformed every corner of her existence. The mail-order bride who'd arrived broken and afraid was gone. In her place stood Lena Turner, teacher, wife, partner, and woman who'd reclaimed her own story and written a new ending on her own terms. And that ending, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was really just the beginning. The first frost came early that year, painting the Wyoming grasslands silver and transforming the morning air into something that burned the lungs with its purity. Lena stood at the schoolhouse window watching her students arrive, their breath forming clouds in the cold, their cheeks pink with exertion and excitement. 3 months had passed since that first terrifying day of teaching, and the transformation in both the children and herself felt nothing short of miraculous. Emma Morrison, once shy and uncertain, now helped the younger students with their reading without being asked. The Chen boys had progressed so rapidly in English that they were translating stories for their grandfather, bridging the gap between his world and theirs. Even little James, who'd struggled with his letters at first, could now sound out simple words and took fierce pride in every small victory. But it was the change in Lena herself that struck her most profoundly as she watched the children hang their coats and gather their slates. The woman who'd arrived in Wyoming expecting nothing more than survival had been replaced by someone she barely recognized, someone confident, purposeful, loved. The constant voice of self-doubt that had once narrated her every move had quieted to a whisper, drowned out by the evidence of her own competence and worth. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner," the chorus of voices rang out as she turned from the window. "Good morning, students. Who's ready to learn about the solar system today?" Hands shot up across the room, eager and unafraid, and Lena felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came with knowing she'd created this space where curiosity was celebrated rather than crushed. The morning lessons went smoothly, the children absorbed in learning about planets and stars and the vast universe beyond their small corner of Wyoming. During the lunch break, while the students ate outside despite the cold, Sally Morrison arrived with her eldest daughter in tow. "Mrs. Turner, might I have a word?" Sally's expression was serious, and Lena felt a flutter of concern. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "More than all right. That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Sally glanced at Emma, who was helping the younger children with their coats. "My daughter has grown so much under your instruction. She reads everything she can get her hands on now, asks questions about history and science and the world. Yesterday she told me she wants to attend the university in Laramie when she's older." "That's wonderful," Lena said warmly. "Emma is exceptionally bright. She'd do well at university." "That's just it. 6 months ago, I would have laughed at the idea of my daughter going to university. Would have told her to focus on finding a good husband and keeping house. But you've shown me that women can be more than that." Sally's eyes grew bright with emotion. "You've changed my daughter's life, Mrs. Turner, and in doing so, you've changed mine. I wanted to thank you for that." After Sally left, Lena stood alone in the schoolhouse, Sally's words echoing in her mind. She'd known intellectually that teaching mattered, that education changed lives. But hearing it stated so plainly, understanding that her work was reshaping not just the children, but entire families' understanding of what was possible, that struck her with the force of revelation. That evening, she shared the conversation with Caleb as they worked together preparing dinner, their movements synchronized from months of practice. "Sally Morrison told me I'm changing lives," Lena said, chopping vegetables while Caleb seasoned meat for stew. "It made me realize something. I came here thinking I was the one who needed saving. But maybe I was always meant to be the one who did the saving." Caleb set down his work and crossed to where she stood, pulling her into his arms despite her protests about the knife in her hand. "You did both. You saved yourself first, and now you're saving others. That's what strength looks like, Lena." She melted into his embrace, still marveling at how natural this had become. The casual affection, the easy intimacy, the knowledge that she was cherished exactly as she was. At night they fell asleep wrapped around each other, and in the morning they woke to find themselves still intertwined, as if even in sleep they sought each other out. Their lovemaking had evolved from tentative exploration to something deeper and more confident. A conversation conducted in touches and sighs rather than words. Caleb made her feel beautiful in ways she'd never imagined possible, worshiping her curves and softness with reverent hands, making her understand that her body wasn't something to apologize for, but to celebrate. "I never knew it could be like this," she'd whispered to him one night after they'd loved each other with particular tenderness. "Like what?" "Safe and passionate at the same time. I thought those things were opposites. But with you, they're the same thing." November brought the first serious snow, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale. The school remained open despite the weather. Parents determined that their children's education wouldn't be interrupted by something as common as winter. Caleb helped Lena install a better stove in the schoolhouse and stockpiled firewood to ensure the children would stay warm during lessons. One morning, Lena arrived at the school to find something unexpected. A letter tacked to the door. Her heart seized with familiar fear, her mind immediately jumping to Marcus. But when she pulled it down and read the return address, she saw it was from the Territorial Superintendent of Education. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and read, "Dear Mrs. Turner, Word of your exceptional teaching has reached this office through multiple commendations from local families. We are writing to offer you official certification as a territorial educator and to inquire whether you would be willing to mentor other teachers in rural areas. Your innovative methods and dedication to student success represent the highest standards of our profession. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Howard Jameson, Superintendent of Education. Lena read the letter 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Official certification, recognition, the opportunity to influence education beyond her small classroom. It was more than she'd dared to dream. She ran all the way back to the ranch, her skirts hitching up around her knees, the letter clutched in her fist. She found Caleb in the barn and threw herself into his arms, laughing and crying at once. "They want to certify me! The Territorial Education Office wants to officially recognize my teaching and have me train other educators." Caleb lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "Of course they do. You're brilliant. I could have told them that months ago." "This means the school is legitimate. It means I'm legitimate. It means everything we've built here is real and recognized and valued." "It was always real, Lena. The certification just makes it official." That night they celebrated with a special dinner, and afterward Caleb presented her with another gift, a hand-carved sign that read Turner School in elegant letters. "For the schoolhouse," he explained. "Every legitimate institution needs a proper name." Lena traced the carved letters with her fingers, overwhelmed by the gesture. "You made this? Worked on it for weeks in the barn when you thought I was just doing evening chores. Wanted to surprise you. It's perfect. You're perfect." She kissed him deeply, pouring gratitude and love into the gesture. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "We found each other," Caleb corrected, "and I'm the lucky one." As winter deepened, the rhythm of their life together grew richer and more textured. The school thrived despite the challenging weather, students arriving bundled in coats and scarves, their eagerness to learn undiminished by cold or snow. Lena continued to pour her heart into teaching, and the children continued to flourish under her care. At home, she and Caleb managed the ranch as true partners. Lena kept the account books with meticulous precision, finding ways to save money and maximize profits that Caleb had never considered. Under her financial management, they were able to purchase 3 breeding cows that spring, expanding the herd and securing their economic future. "You're a better rancher than I am," Caleb observed one evening as they reviewed the accounts together, his hand absently stroking her hair as she leaned against his shoulder. "I'm a better accountant," Lena corrected. "You're the one who knows cattle and land and weather. I just know numbers. Together we make it work." "Together," Caleb repeated, kissing the top of her head. "I like the sound of that." In December, an early Christmas gift arrived, a package from Philadelphia containing books, teaching supplies, and a letter from Lena's former employer at the girls' academy. The headmistress had heard through mutual acquaintances about Lena's new teaching position and wanted to express her pride and support. "My dear Lena, I always knew you were destined for great things, though I confess I never imagined those great things would happen in the Wyoming Territory. Your brother tried to convince me you were incompetent and unstable, but I never believed his lies. I'm thrilled to hear you've found both professional success and personal happiness. The enclosed materials are a small token of my esteem. May your school continue to flourish. With warmest regards, Beatrice Hartwell." Lena showed the letter to Caleb, tears streaming down her face. "Someone from my old life remembers me as I really was, not as Marcus wanted people to see me, but as I actually was." "Because that's who you've always been," Caleb said gently. "Your brother couldn't change the truth of you, no matter how hard he tried." That conversation led to others about Lena's past, about the parts of her history she'd been too afraid or ashamed to share. She told Caleb about her parents, about the joy she'd found in learning and teaching before their deaths had left her vulnerable to Marcus's control. She talked about the years of psychological and physical abuse, the systematic destruction of her confidence and self-worth. And Caleb listened without judgment, holding her through the difficult memories, helping her process trauma she'd been carrying alone for too long. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, Lena's head pillowed on his chest. "To Philadelphia, to the life you had before Marcus took it from you?" Lena considered this seriously. No. Because that life is connected to him, to that version of myself who didn't know how to fight back. Here, I built something entirely my own. This life, this school, this marriage, it's all mine in a way nothing in Philadelphia ever was. I don't want to go back. I want to keep moving forward. Good, Caleb said with satisfaction, because I'm not letting you go anywhere. Spring arrived with a rush of green and the return of warmth to the land. The school year drew to a close with a celebration that brought the entire scattered community together. Parents arrived with food and gifts, children performed readings and recitations, and Lena stood at the center of it all, basking in the evidence of what she'd accomplished. The Morrison children read passages from classic literature with confidence and clarity. The Chen boys demonstrated their mathematical prowess, solving complex problems on the blackboard while their grandfather beamed with pride. Even little James, once unable to recognize his letters, read an entire story aloud without a single mistake. As the celebration wound down and families began departing, promising to return in the fall when school resumed, Sally Morrison approached Lena one final time. "Mrs. Turner, the community has been talking. We want to expand the school, add a second room for older students, maybe hire an assistant teacher if we can find someone qualified. Would you be willing to serve as headmistress?" Lena's breath caught. Headmistress. Not just a teacher, but the leader of a growing educational institution. It was beyond anything she'd imagined. "I would be honored," she managed. After everyone left, Lena and Caleb stood together in the empty schoolhouse, looking at the space that had transformed from abandoned line shack to thriving center of learning. "Headmistress," Caleb said, trying out the word. "That's quite a title." "It's terrifying," Lena admitted. "What if I'm not capable of managing something that large? What if—" Caleb silenced her with a kiss. "Stop. You're absolutely capable. You've proven that over and over. The only person who still doubts you is you." "Old habits," Lena said ruefully. "Marcus's voice is quieter now, but it's still there sometimes. Then we'll keep drowning it out until it disappears completely, however long it takes." That summer, they broke ground on the addition to the school, the community coming together to help with construction. Caleb supervised the work while Lena planned curriculum for multiple grade levels and drafted advertisements for an assistant teacher position. The Territorial Education Office sent additional funding and supplies, impressed by the school's success and growth. In July, Lena received a letter that made her blood run cold, another communication from Pennsylvania, but this time not from Marcus. It was from a lawyer, informing her that her brother had died suddenly of heart failure, and that as his only living relative, she was entitled to inherit his estate. She stared at the letter, trying to process the information. Marcus was dead. The man who'd terrorized and controlled her, who'd beaten her and broken her spirit, was simply gone. She waited for relief or satisfaction or grief, but felt only a strange numbness. "He's dead," she said to Caleb when he came in from the fields. "Marcus is dead." Caleb took the letter and read it carefully. "How do you feel?" "I don't know. I thought I'd feel something, happy or sad or vindicated, but I just feel empty, like learning about the death of someone I used to know a long time ago." "That makes sense? You've spent the past year building a new life. He wasn't part of that life. He was just a shadow from the past. The lawyer wants to know if I'll claim the inheritance, the house, the money, everything Marcus had. What do you want to do?" Lena thought about it for a long moment. "I want to sell it all and donate the proceeds to schools for girls. Let something good come from his legacy instead of more cruelty and control." "Then that's what we'll do." They sat together in the fading light, Caleb's arm around her shoulders, and Lena felt the last chain connecting her to her painful past finally break and fall away. Marcus couldn't hurt her anymore. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. His power over her life had ended not with some dramatic confrontation, but with simple mortality. "I'm free," she whispered. "Truly, completely free." "You've been free since the day you chose to stay here. This just makes it official." The inheritance, once processed and sold, amounted to a substantial sum, enough to fully fund the school expansion and establish an endowment for future educational initiatives. Lena worked with the Territorial Education Office to create scholarship programs for girls who wanted to pursue advanced education but lacked the means. By the time autumn arrived and the expanded school reopened, the Turner School had become a model for rural education across the territory. Lena presided as headmistress over 2 classrooms, 23 students, and 1 assistant teacher, a young woman from Denver who'd answered the advertisement with enthusiasm and excellent credentials. Standing at the front of the larger classroom on opening day, looking out at eager young faces, Lena felt a profound sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was what she'd been meant to do. Not just teach, but create an institution that would outlast her, that would change lives for generations to come. That evening, she and Caleb celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. They'd been married for a year, together in the fullest sense for most of that time, and the depth of their partnership still amazed Lena daily. "A year ago, we were 2 desperate people making a practical arrangement," she said, raising her glass of wine. "Look at us now." "I don't think we were ever that practical," Caleb countered. "I think we were always heading toward this, even when we didn't know it yet." "Maybe you're right. Maybe some things are just meant to be." They made love that night with the windows open, letting in the cool autumn air and the sounds of the land around them. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lena felt a completeness she'd never known was possible. "I want to have children," she said suddenly, the words surprising even herself. "Someday, when we're ready, I want to fill this house with life and love and noise." Caleb pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "Are you sure? You don't have to." "I'm sure. Not right away, but eventually. I want to create a family with you, Caleb. A real family built on love and respect, not control and fear. I want to show our children what a true partnership looks like." "Then that's what we'll do, when you're ready, however many children you want." 3, Lena said decisively. "I want 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, or 2 boys and a girl, or any combination really. Just 3 little humans to love and teach and help become themselves." They stayed awake late into the night, talking about the future they were building together. About expanding the ranch and the school, about the children they would raise, about growing old together in this house they'd made into a home. Winter came again, and with it the familiar rhythm of teaching and ranching and partnership. The school continued to thrive, students learning and growing under Lena's guidance and her assistant's enthusiastic support. Word of the Turner School spread across the territory, and families began relocating to the area specifically to access quality education for their children. In February, on a morning so cold the water in the wash basin had frozen solid, Lena woke feeling strange. She lay still for a moment, trying to identify the sensation, then bolted from bed and barely made it to the chamber pot before being violently sick. Caleb appeared in the doorway, concern written across his face. "Lena, are you all right?" She wiped her mouth with a shaking hand and looked up at him, realization dawning. "I think I might be pregnant. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Are you sure?" Caleb asked, kneeling beside her. "Not completely, but I've missed my monthly courses, and this sickness, it feels right somehow." She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "I think there's a baby." Caleb's face transformed, joy and wonder and a touch of fear playing across his features. "A baby. Our baby." "Are you happy?" Lena asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely breathe." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with infinite gentleness. "You're going to be an incredible mother, Lena. And you're going to be an amazing father." She pulled back to look at him. "Our child is going to grow up knowing only love and support. They'll never know violence or cruelty or control. We'll make sure of it." "We will," Caleb promised. "Together." The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in town, and Lena adjusted her teaching schedule to accommodate the growing life inside her. Her assistant took on more responsibilities, and the community rallied around their beloved headmistress, bringing gifts and offering support. Lena continued teaching through the spring, her expanding belly a source of endless fascination for the younger students who asked constant questions about babies and birth and how it all worked. She answered them honestly and age-appropriately, turning pregnancy into another teaching opportunity. "Mrs. Turner," little James asked one day, "will you still be our teacher after the baby comes?" Of course I will. I might need to take a few weeks to rest and recover, but then I'll be back. Teaching is part of who I am, James. The baby will just be another part. In May, as the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie and the school year drew to a close, Lena gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Lena felt a love so profound it redefined her understanding of what her heart was capable of holding. "She's perfect," Caleb whispered, stroking the baby's dark hair with a gentle finger, "just like her mother." They named her Margaret, after Caleb's mother, and she became the center of their world without displacing anything that had come before. Lena discovered that love didn't divide, it multiplied, expanding to encompass this new life without diminishing what she felt for Caleb or her students or the life they'd built. The summer passed in a haze of new parenthood, both exhausting and exhilarating. Lena nursed her daughter and planned lessons for the fall term, managed household accounts, and dreamed about Margaret's future. Caleb proved to be a devoted father, rising for night feedings without complaint, carrying the baby in a sling while he worked around the ranch, singing lullabies in his rough but tender voice. When school resumed in September, Lena returned to teaching with Margaret in a cradle near her desk. The students were enchanted by the baby, learning responsibility and gentleness as they took turns rocking the cradle or singing to soothe her when she fussed. "This is what community looks like," Lena told her assistant one afternoon as they watched Emma Morrison expertly change Margaret's diaper while explaining the process to the younger students. Everyone caring for everyone else, supporting each other through the challenges. 2 years passed in what felt like heartbeats. Margaret grew from infant to toddler, taking her first steps across the schoolhouse floor during a morning lesson while students cheered. The Turner School expanded again, adding a third classroom and 2 more teachers. Lena served as headmistress over an institution that educated nearly 40 students and had become a point of pride for the entire region. At home, the ranch flourished under their joint management. Caleb's herd had doubled, and Lena's financial acumen had made them genuinely prosperous. They hired a ranch hand to help with the increased workload, a quiet young man who lived in the barn and proved invaluable during calving season. On a crisp October evening, as Lena sat on the porch watching Margaret play in the yard while Caleb tended to the horses, she took stock of her life with wonder and gratitude. 5 years ago, she'd been broken and afraid, stepping off a stagecoach into an uncertain future. Now she was confident, loved, successful, and surrounded by evidence of the life she'd built through courage and determination. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "About how far we've come. About how this random advertisement in a newspaper changed everything." "It wasn't random," Caleb said. "It was exactly what we both needed, arriving at exactly the right time." "Do you ever regret it? The way things started between us, the marriage of convenience, all the complications?" "Not for 1 second. Every moment, even the hard ones, brought us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Margaret ran over then, throwing herself at Caleb's legs with a shriek of delight. He lifted her into his lap, and she immediately began chattering about the grasshopper she'd been chasing. Lena watched them together, her heart so full it ached. This was home. Not the house or the land or the school, though all of those mattered. Home was Caleb and Margaret, was the community they'd built, was the love and partnership and purpose that filled every corner of her existence. That night, after Margaret was asleep and she and Caleb lay wrapped together in the darkness, Lena spoke the truth that had been growing in her heart. "I'm pregnant again." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "Again? Are you sure?" "As sure as I was with Margaret. I know my body now, know the signs." She placed his hand over her stomach. "There's another life beginning here, another piece of our future. How do you feel about it?" "Terrified and thrilled, the same way I felt about everything else we've done together." She laughed softly. "At least this time I know what I'm doing." "We know what we're doing," Caleb corrected. "We're building a family, one precious life at a time." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Lena knew what to expect and had help from her teaching staff and the community. In the spring, she gave birth to twin boys, red-faced and loud and absolutely perfect. They named them Thomas and James, after Caleb's father and Margaret's favorite student, and their arrival completed the family Lena had dreamed of. With 3 children and a growing school, life became more complex and demanding. But it was the kind of complexity that brought richness rather than stress, the kind of demands that felt like privilege rather than burden. Lena and Caleb moved through their days with practiced coordination, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating victories together. The Turner School gained territorial recognition as one of the finest rural educational institutions in the West. Students who'd learned under Lena's instruction went on to universities and professional careers, carrying with them the belief that education and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Emma Morrison became a teacher herself, returning to the Turner School to work alongside her former instructor. The Chen boys both earned scholarships to the university in Laramie. Little James, now not so little, was accepted into an engineering program in Denver. Each success felt personal to Lena, proof that what she'd built mattered, that the life she'd claimed for herself had ripple effects far beyond what she could see or measure. On a warm summer evening 10 years after that first terrifying day of teaching, Lena stood at the fence line watching the sunset while her children played in the yard. Margaret, now 8, was reading to her younger brothers with the same patient care Lena had once shown her students. The twins, rambunctious and creative, hung on their sister's every word. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, a gesture so familiar it felt like coming home. "Look at them," Lena said softly. "Look at what we made." "I am looking. And I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you answered my advertisement all those years ago." "Lucky? I was the lucky one. I was running from everything, expecting nothing, and you gave me the world." "We gave each other the world," Caleb said, resting his chin on her shoulder. "That's what partnership means." Lena turned in his arms to face him, seeing the silver threading through his hair, the lines around his eyes from years of smiling, the solid strength that had never wavered in all their time together. "I love you," she said, the words as fresh and true as the first time she'd spoken them. "I love you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for protecting me while I learned to protect myself, for building this life with me, one small choice at a time. I love you for having the courage to stay, for transforming my empty house into a home, for showing me that love doesn't have to be complicated or painful. It can be simple and good and true." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the ranch they'd built together hummed with life and purpose. The school stood on its hill, ready to welcome another generation of students. Their children laughed and played, growing strong and confident in the shelter of their parents' love. Lena Whitaker Turner had come to Wyoming broken and afraid, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found purpose, dignity, freedom, and a love that had transformed every corner of her existence. She'd reclaimed her voice and her strength, had built an institution that would outlast her, had created a family rooted in respect and partnership rather than control and fear. The mail-order bride who'd stepped off that dusty stagecoach was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, who claimed her space in the world without apology, who had written her own ending on her own terms. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and her family gathered around her, Lena understood with profound clarity that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of struggle or challenge, but the presence of love, purpose, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She'd come west looking for safety and found herself. She'd married for legal protection and discovered genuine partnership. She'd hoped to survive and instead had learned to thrive. The woman she'd become bore little resemblance to the frightened, bruised person who'd arrived all those years ago. And yet, in some essential way, she was still the same person, just finally free to become who she'd always been meant to be. As night settled over the Turner Ranch and family moved inside to warmth and light and the comfort of home, Lena took one last look at the landscape that had witnessed her transformation. The endless prairie, the distant mountains, the sky vast enough to hold all her dreams. This was her home. These were her people. This was the life she'd fought for and won. And it was more beautiful than anything she'd ever dared to imagine.